This new peptide incinerates fat. Stay tuned. I'll let you know what it is. I created Species Nutrition with one mission in mind: to provide bodybuilders and serious athletes with no-nonsense supplements that work. I put my name and reputation on every bottle of Species Nutrition products. If you want to be your absolute best, join the evolution.
RX Television, RxMuscle.com. This is Ask Dave, your weekly 30-minute question and answer show with Dave Palumbo. Whatever is on your mind, be it bodybuilding, non-bodybuilding, diet, training, supplementation. Of course, IFBB Pro shows, the IFBB Pro calendar in full swing. And next week, very excited about this. Dave, myself, Chris Aceto, and a host of other big names you're going to see down there in Pittsburgh for the Pittsburgh Pro. The first ever Pittsburgh Pro is going to have an open class competition. Check on our Instagram right now. We're on top of all the, reposts as far as like Nick Walker just posted an update a couple of hours ago. And the show is shaping up to be very exciting. They announced yesterday that the guest posing is going to be another all-star guest posing. In traditional terms, it would be your best open class bodybuilders on stage for the guest posing this year. Obviously, with many of the best already competing this year, you're going to have Mr. Olympia Samson Dowder. You're going to have two-time 212 Olympia champion Keon Pearson, and then two of the best classic physique competitors, and Mike Sommerfeld and Ramon Dino on stage guest posing. So everything that's going on that weekend, we're going to capture for you. So if you haven't already done so, subscribe to this channel. We're going to have loads and loads of content throughout the course of the weekend. Dave, myself, are going to be all over the place, wall to wall. Obviously, Chris is going to be joining us on the wrap-ups. We actually got a message from someone today. I was having a conversation with him. So Matt Grego wants to be in on the recaps as well. So we're going to have a lot of fun with this. Of course, we're going to do some interviews as well. We'll try to catch the athletes coming out of the pro meeting. So a lot to expect over the course of that weekend, and then, of course, the following week with the New York Pro. So anything and everything is all on the table. We go to the questions. The first two questions on this show from the Dave Palumbo Experience app. For shoulders, I like to include upright rows in my routine. However, in the days following the workout, I get significant stiffness and soreness in my rotator cuffs, last for a couple of days. Should I continue including this movement in my routine or opt for lateral raised movements which do not cause the same symptoms?
When my shoulders first started hurting, I originally thought that it was rotator cuff related. I didn't realize I had joint problems, but everyone has a little bit of strain in the rotator cuff from time to time. And the stronger you become at pressing, the weaker, the rotator cuffs stay pretty much the same, but the deltoid muscle is getting stronger. And this very powerful deltoid is pulling on those rotator cuffs. Now, what the rotator cuff does, it's these strap-like muscles that hold the head of the humerus into that acetabulum joint. So if they get weak, you get movement in the joint. So those muscles need to be strong. Now, if you're putting a tremendous strain on the deltoid muscle that covers that joint, it pulls at these rotator cuffs, and they just can't handle the pulling because the deltoid muscle is so powerful. So what you need to do is you need to train those rotator cuff muscles. You need to get a dumbbell, and you might have to start really light, like with a 5-pound dumbbell, and you put your arm up like this. You do these raises like this with each arm. I get a cable, and I do these where I rotate external rotation, and I do those on my shoulder day. But if you have injuries, you might want to do it every other day for like 2 weeks to strengthen those rotator cuffs up. And then what you'll find is they start tightening up, because what happens is the muscles, the rotator cuffs grow, they hypertrophy, and they create more stability in that joint, so that when you're pressing overhead, you're not going to feel that pain. Remember, You're only as good as the weak link in your body. And that's the reason I tell people also, if you train your biceps and triceps and you don't train your forearms, what becomes the weak link? This forearm muscle, and then you get wrist pain. So you cannot not train a muscle group, including the rotator cuff. Just because you can't see them doesn't mean you shouldn't train them. You got to train those rotator cuffs, especially the heavier you lift. Guys and women who don't lift heavy will never really notice that. But when you start pushing heavier weights, those deltoid muscles will cause those rotators to get strained and possibly even tear if they're too weak. So make sure you train them.
Second question. Again, these first two questions from the Dave Palumbo Experience app. What are the best we got a lot of questions, by the way, on peptides on this episode. Best peptides to increase IGF-1 levels?
Well, I mean, the best way to increase IGF-1 levels is take IGF-1, which is a peptide. So you could, if you go to our friends at TitanMedicalCenter.com, you tell them you want some long R3 IGF-1, that's the best way to raise IGF-1 levels. Otherwise, you have to then hope that your body's going to release IGF-1. Now, where does IGF-1 get produced? Well, predominantly in the liver, right? So when GH is released in the body, okay, the liver then releases IGF-1 in response to that. Now, there also is local IGF-1 release in all the muscles. So when muscle gets damaged, for instance, it releases a local form of IGF-1 known as mechanogrowth factor, MGF, which is really just IGF-1 that's locally produced. Those are small, trivial amounts, though, that happen, and they basically, initiate the repair process. But the systemic release of IGF-1 is from the liver. So you want, number one, you want a healthy liver. Number two, everyone responds differently to GH. Now, if you can stimulate GH production, which then stimulates IGF-1, production, you can get IGF-1 that way. So a lot of guys take GH releasers like semaglutide and all the other ones that we've mentioned, that are available. But the most direct way to increase IGF-1 is to take IGF-1. I mean, that's just, that's the easiest way. The problem is if you take too much IGF-1, your receptors for IGF-1 downregulate too quickly. So I always recommend 10 to 20 micrograms max per day, 30 days in a row, at least, and then take 2 weeks off, and then you can go back to 30 days in a row. And I only tell people to take IGF-1 usually when you're in an off-season scenario, because it has an insulin-like effect. It will drop your blood sugar. So if you're on low carbs, probably not a good idea to be doing that, because you can get some low blood sugars. Now, these two questions were from the Dave Palumbo Experience app. It's an app you can download on your Android or iTunes store. On your phone, you get Dave Palumbo, me, as your coach in your back pocket, essentially. It's $29 a month. You get access to all my writings, all my videos in one place in a very organized manner. You get all my protocols, off-season, my keto diets there, my cyclical carb diet, my off-season diet, all my drug cycles are there, pre-contest, off-season. I answer everyone's questions in an open forum. So it's a great learning experience. You get to see everyone's questions, everyone's answers, and I do a Q&A video exclusively for the app members every single week. Haven't missed yet. So you get an extra Ask Dave to learn by. It's like having a library of knowledge in your back pocket that's constantly evolving. And that's what people love about it, because it's new information all the time. Thank you guys for supporting it. We have a ton of members on there, and it keeps increasing. And that's what basically motivates me to keep going. So thanks a lot.
We're going to take questions from our Instagram, our YouTube community, Facebook, all our social media outlets. Let's go to, we had a quick question here about Retatrutide from Ricky, from Altair Eagle. Thoughts on Retatrutide heart arrhythmias being reported? Can it be mitigated, or is it a risk that one must assume? It seems like a promising peptide. Your thoughts?
Yeah. I pronounce it Retatrutide, but I don't know what the right pronunciation is. It's a little bit of a tongue twister. And this is like I call it like a third generation GLP agonist, compound. So you had Ozempic, right, which was a GLP-1 agonist, which we know it slowed the digestive tract. It improved blood sugars. It caused a lack of appetite, and people lost weight on it. Then they came out with Mounjaro, which was basically Ozempic plus a GIP receptor agonist, which basically increases insulin production and helps lower blood sugars. But for some reason, the two of them synergistically together cause more weight loss. Unfortunately, they don't really know why, but it does work. Mounjaro is more effective than Ozempic. And now they just came out with a triple one, which they call Retatrutide or Retatrutide. And that includes a glucagon receptor agonist. Now, it's interesting because GLP-1, reduces or blocks glucagon production. Now, glucagon is the hormone that's released in opposition to insulin. So insulin stores sugar as glucose, stores glucose as glycogen. Glucagon takes glycogen and kicks glucose into the bloodstream, raising blood sugar. So obviously, if you reduce blood sugar, that's going to help, to tighter blood sugar control. It's going to reduce insulin levels, and it's going to, make it easier to lose weight. But for some reason, the addition of this glucagon receptor agonist, which would increase glucagon production, which doesn't make sense, increases fat burning in the body. And they don't know why. And if you read I read all the literature, they're like, we're trying to figure out why they synergistically work together. So it appears, at least in studies, that this Retatrutide is more effective than both Mounjaro and Ozempic. It's because it's got three targeted ways it's working. The question is, does it have dangerous side effects? I read the article. I'm not so convinced that it's something that's going to happen to everyone. I think if you're maybe prone to arrhythmias, it's possible that it can increase the risk of them. But all these drugs do have side effects. One of the things they tell you right in the pamphlet is if you had a history of like a thyroid cancer, medullary thyroid cancer, you shouldn't take it, or any kind of pancreatic, pancreatitis or any kind of pancreatic issues. So, first of all, I don't need it. I don't need to burn any more fat. I'm already too lean. But the point is, I wouldn't take it because I had, a thyroid cancer. So nothing is without side effects. Remember that. So the question is, should you use it? Should you not use it? I think it's relatively safe. I don't think it would be approved if this particular drug was more dangerous than Mounjaro, because they don't need to risk it. Mounjaro is selling; they can't even keep the stuff in stock. So I have to assume this is pretty safe, and maybe just there's a certain population of people that might be sensitive to it or at risk. I think that it is something that you can try and not really worry about it. Now, I think our good friends at Titan also have this new peptide as well. So you can get Mounjaro, Ozempic, and this Retatrutide from TitanMedicalCenter.com. Just make sure you mention Dave Palumbo, RxMuscle, for your discount.
So check it out again, TitanMedicalCenter.com. Bilal Hamide, I keep reading that injecting PEDs through an insulin syringe in the side delts area is not preferable, and it's best to inject in the abdominal area. Is it true, and is there a difference?
I think he said anabolics, right? Like testosterone?
Yeah, he's talking about PEDs through an insulin syringe,
Look, if you're only taking a very small amount of testosterone, like I take literally 20 units, okay, which is 40 milligrams twice a week. So it only takes up like 20, it's like 0.2 of a cc. It's a very small amount. So I put it in an insulin syringe and I just pop it in my delt, but I'm very lean. For some people that don't have a lot of muscle on their body and that have more body fat, sometimes the insulin syringe, because it's short, doesn't go deep enough, and you can't get it into the muscle. Now, I know some people do inject subcutaneously, which you can do. I always think that when you do the subcutaneous injections, you kind of get like an irritation and a swelling at the point of injection. So I prefer to do the intramuscular route. I wouldn't recommend injecting anything on your stomach, to be honest with you, nothing. Because who the heck wants marks on your stomach? And you know what I mean? Because if you stick enough needles into your stomach, you're gonna leave marks, and it could cause a little scar tissue. Abdominal area should be clear, because that's the first thing you see when you take your shirt off, So I would stay away from the abdominal area. I would do it into the delts. I would do it into the glutes. Obviously, if you're doing an insulin shot, with an insulin syringe, you're going to have to go delts. Delts is this area of your delt is the least fatty area on your body. So for most people, especially guys who work out, it's going to be a very easy, the front, it's really the side delt, but the front part of the side delt, or they call it the anterior part of the side delt, is the ideal place to put an insulin syringe loaded, testosterone shot in. Now, if you're doing 2-3 cc's because you're on a cycle, I would do it with a 22 or 23 gauge, at least 1 to 1.5 inch syringe in your glutes or in your lats or deep into your shoulders. You don't put multiple cc's through an insulin pen. That's disaster. When you're doing a lot of volume, you got to do it deeper into the muscle to make sure that it's getting in there. When you're doing small amounts, it doesn't really matter.
Taking question from our good friend Alexander Rune Training. Two-part question. Why do people say that it is not a good idea to swap EQ or DECA after 6 to 8 weeks like you do when the saturation time is 10 weeks or so? Also, why don't people go off cycle anymore? These new studies, and I don't know which studies he's referring to, but he says they're BS. But first part, again, why do people think it's not a good idea to swap EQ or DECA after 6 to 8 weeks?
Why it's not a good idea, or why it is a good idea?
Why do people say that it's not a good idea?
I don't know. People are idiots. I don't know. Look, if you have access to multiple drugs, look, let's say you only have a prescription, right, for one of these rejuvenation clinics, and they give you testosterone and DECA. I would stay on that all the time, obviously, because you know it's real. You have a prescription for it. You don't really have access to anything else, so that's fine. But most likely in those situations, you're using small amounts anyway. But if you're doing steroid cycles like to grow muscle, okay, and you're taking 1,000 testosterone, you're taking 600 milligrams of EQ a week. I just find after 6 weeks, if you switch to another compound, it starts working. I don't wait till the drug stops working. I switch the compounds while they're still working, because you don't want to wait till the point of saturation where the receptors are just sick of it already. So every 6 to 8 weeks I find is a good time to then switch drugs. So you might go from DECA to EQ. You might go from EQ to enanthate. You might go from enanthate to masteron, whatever you can, or you might go just back to EQ again. It doesn't matter, but keep switching them in the off season so that your body stays, like guessing. The receptors don't know what it's going to get, and just before they stop working, you're switching compounds. I also don't like to use a lot of different drugs in the off season. I like to just stick with 2 anabolics, because we know 2 drugs has an exponential effect. There's no reason to kick 3, 4 different drugs in, because then you're getting used to all of them at the same time. So I'll stick with testosterone with another anabolic, and I'll keep switching it every 6 to 8 weeks. And I find that, look, just through experimentation with not only me, but all my clients, that works best. You kick a little GH in with that, maybe an aromatase inhibitor if you need it, and you're good to go. The most important part of the off season is to eat and train heavy, right? And train well with full range of motion, et cetera, et cetera. The drugs are a necessary, evil that are in there, but you don't have to do anything extremely exotic. Now, pre-contest, we'll use more variety of drugs. We might use 3 drugs, 4 drugs toward the end, just because we're trying to maximize every little and squeeze out every little possibility. But the truth of the matter is you could probably use 2 drugs for that. And I know guys that have done that and look just as good, because it's just a matter of getting in shape. But by convention, we usually use more drugs, or more variety of drugs, maybe in slightly lower dosages pre-contest.
Let's go to raw muscle glutes. Does GH have any direct effects on the body, or are all of its effects mediated through IGF-1?
Well, the direct effect of growth hormone in the body is fat burning. So it mobilizes fat directly. Indirectly, it builds muscle via the release of IGF-1 from the liver. So it has 2 effects on the body. It directly burns fat, but it indirectly, causes muscle growth via the release of IGF-1, which they used to call a somatomedin, because it was like a middle hormone, meaning that it was between something. So GH caused this next hormone to be released, which actually caused growth. Because we all thought originally, back in the 80s, that growth hormone was the hormone that was causing, bone and muscle growth. But it wasn't. They found there was another hormone that was released. It was along the line that was actually the initiating factor. They called it somatomedin C initially, and then changed the name to IGF-1. They actually changed it while I was in school. Believe it or not, I was doing research, and I've told the story before, so I'm not losing my mind. I was in my 3rd year of college. This had to be 1989, and I stayed over the summer, and I was doing research on chickens. And we were studying the effects of thyroid hormone on muscular development in chickens, and they were doing it with regular chickens and chickens with muscular dystrophy to see if adding, or to see if thyroid deficiency might have been responsible for what was happening in dystrophic chickens, or people who, ostensibly humans who had muscular dystrophy. So we did all these studies, and what we found is that, when thyroid hormones are not at adequate levels, these somatomedin C or IGF-1 levels are too low in the body, meaning that the reason why the muscles don't develop properly is because there's not enough IGF-1 release, so that it's, at least to some degree, thyroid hormone in the right amounts maximizes the release of IGF-1. So what that told me as when I entered the bodybuilding realm was that if your thyroid gland is not working adequately, even if you have enough GH release, you're not going to release enough IGF-1. So you want to make sure. But ironically, when you take growth hormone, it actually causes your thyroid gland or thyroid hormone, T4, to convert to T3 at much higher amounts. So if you're on GH, you'll notice your T3 levels tend to be higher and T4 tends to be lower. And that's because that T3, which is the active thyroid hormone, is necessary to make IGF-1 work better. So it only makes sense that IGF-1 upregulates the conversion of T4 to T3, or either GH does it or IGF-1 directly. I'm not really sure. I don't think they know for sure. But we do notice that. And if you go for blood work while you're on GH, and the more you're on, the more you'll see this, you'll see a greater T4 to T3 conversion, meaning that your T3 levels are higher and your T4 levels might even be low. And T4 is, and people say, well, that's why we should supplement with T4. And the answer to that question is no, because T4 is an inactive thyroid hormone. It doesn't matter if it's a little low. It's low because you're converting more of it to T3, which is what's important, because that's the active thyroid hormone.
Had a question about HGH and keto. Can you make good gains only running HGH? He says he's planning on using it while on keto, while cutting to hold on a muscle while burning fat.
I'll tell you my experience. When I would go off cycle, in my off season, and I would always stay on a little bit of growth hormone, usually like 2 IUs a day and I would notice a huge difference in recovery. And if I didn't take GH, I noticed that I wouldn't recover as well. Now, I still got the deflated look from coming off the steroids. I still lost some strength, but my recovery was much better on growth hormone than it was on nothing, which tells me that GH is important for muscle recovery and rebuilding, but it's not really going to give you those increased pumps. It's not going to give you the hypertrophy of the muscle that the steroids do, but it's important in protein synthesis and recovery. So it does have an effect. The good thing is you can stay on GH when you're off cycle because the growth hormone has nothing to do with the androgen receptor or androgen receptor regeneration. So it's not going to interrupt your I guess recovery off cycle. The only thing you might want to do is a lot of guys go off the GH just because they want to give their pancreas a rest. Because remember, GH still antagonizes insulin production, meaning that insulin doesn't work as well when GH is present. And that's why you want to stay on lower dose GH so you're not putting your pancreas under tremendous strain all year round. And so if you're going to go off cycle, for 6, 8, 10 weeks, and you're going to stay on some GH, stay on like 2 IUs a day. I wouldn't stay on any more than that.
We had a question. I think we have a couple of questions about legs. One is about Tom Platz. He goes on with his nicknames, Quadfather, Sultan of Squat.
Yeah.
Why does Tom Platz seem to have a negative opinion regarding the effectiveness of 45-degree leg presses, often stating that it is a, quote, inferior movement? Do you know why he would say this? And do you agree with that opinion?
I always hated 45-degree leg press. I never felt it in my legs properly. It was like it's a weird like movement. It like works like, I always felt it worked a very limited amount of my quads. And I felt like I was using a lot of hip joint in there to push the weight up. I do horizontal leg press. So I'll get on a machine or sometimes there's free weights, but usually a machine, plate loaded machine. And you push straight out. Because that I feel on my quads, I feel it in my adductors, I feel it in my, I feel it in my glutes a little bit. If you can come all the way back, if you have that range of motion. But for some reason, I agree with him. I don't like that. I never used it. And you know what? I would always do like squats, and then I'd go to hack squats a lot of times. I would do it just because everyone did leg press. I would do some leg press, but I never really went super heavy on it because I always felt like you were cheating, and I didn't really feel it. And if you don't feel it in your legs, then it's not working. I'm sure there's guys that get good benefits out of leg press, but I always felt like, you ever see Ronnie Coleman? You have to put like he has like 2,000 pounds on that machine. There's no way that, I just don't think it's working well. It's just not a good movement to build muscle. Nothing replaces squats. Hack squats are a good second movement. I hate also, what I also hate? I hate those squat machines. I see guys using them. The machine does all the work for you. It stabilizes the weight, and you wind up pushing from your back. Everyone leans forward into them and uses their lower back to push the weight up. No one gets good leg development on those machines. Now, there are some people that have back injuries and they have to use those machines, and that's fine. But stay away from those machines if you don't need to use them. If you can free weight squat, that's what you should be focusing on, because that's going to get you the best gains of anything. And it goes for the women too. I see all these women come complaining about, I need glutes. I see it in the gym. They all want to build glutes, and they get on that hip thruster machine, that stupid machine. They get on all these butt blaster machines, and no one's getting under a squat bar and squatting. If you squat, you're going to build glute muscles. That's exactly what they need. But people love machines because they're comfortable, and that's the reason they use them. But they're comfortable because the machine is doing a lot of the work. It's stabilizing the weight. You want to have your core stabilized. You want your legs to stabilize. You want your glutes to stabilize. You want the muscle you're training to do the stabilization so that you get a fuller development. People just don't get that. It does not. It's for some reason it doesn't compute. But we live in an automated age where we don't want to push too hard. We don't want to be in pain. We want to do things that require the least amount of effort to get the most benefit out of it, and that's fine. But you're not going to get the most benefit if you're not using free weight movements.
I'm just curious, is it actually called the butt blaster, or did you just make that up? Because that's hilarious.
No, yeah, I think it's called the butt blast. I'm pretty sure there are, but I don't know. The original machine where you kick back, that was called the butt blaster machine. Yeah, and then they they have a couple new versions of it. That hip thruster machine and a couple other BS machines out there. But
they've grown their own segments in gyms recently.
Pretty soon there's going to be glute only gyms. Someone should open up a gym called Glutes. I bet you would be super popular with the women. I give away all my good ideas on the show, but seriously,
that's coming next. You're going to be driving around one day and it's going to be like all new Glutes opening up down the street.
If I opened a chain of gyms called Glutes, I can guarantee you I'd pack the women into those gyms, man. Absolutely.
Well, we did say that we got a couple of questions about legs. So that one was about, I guess, leg machines. This one is a little bit more of a general, maybe a broad brush question. Why do the guys today have much larger legs, but in width, as opposed to, say, the 70s, early 2000s guys? Is it the advanced training techniques, machines? What would you attribute to? And do you agree with that sentiment?
I don't know. I think the guys in the 90s had some pretty damn big legs. I mean, look at Nasser's legs. Look at my legs. Look at, Ronnie's legs. I mean, Jay's leg. I mean, Lavroni when he first came out. I mean, guys had huge legs because everyone squatted back then. There weren't a lot of leg machines. There was the leg press, the hack squat, and the free weight squat, and everyone squatted. Guys today have big legs. I mean, Nick Walker has huge legs, but there's a lot of guys that don't have huge legs either. So I think that the guys that train hard, and I would say 90% of the pro bodybuilders train very hard out there, they have great legs because of that. And if you ask 99% of the people who have good legs, you ask them what they did to build those legs, they'll tell you free weight squats. There's a couple of genetic freaks that build their legs without squats, but not many. Now, there may be guys that don't do squats now because they have injuries, but they built those quads and they built those hams and adductors and glutes using squats initially. So you can't, just because they don't do it now doesn't mean that they didn't do it in the past. So I think you should take that into consideration.
Earlier, we had a question about someone wanted to go on HGH while on a keto diet. Well, this one extends, I guess, the applications of a keto diet. What do you think of the research and anecdotal evidence out of Harvard that keto is ridding people of anxiety, depression, and worse conditions like bipolar, etc.?
Look, it makes sense. I've been saying this for 30 years. I was the original ketogenic diet guy in the bodybuilding realm. I'm not look, Atkins was before me, and then the guys like Vince Gironda, they were doing protein fat for back a long time ago. But I kind of popularized it for the bodybuilding world, and I made sure that people were not only using high protein in their ketogenic diets. So a lot of the medical ketogenic diets are lower protein and higher fats. I did high protein, moderate fats, with low carbs. And the reason it works well, and I've said this before, what's the major reason people fail on their diet? Because they cheat. Why do they cheat? Because they're hungry. When you're on a non-ketogenic diet, in other words, when your brain is using glucose as a fuel source and you lower your carbs, right? Everyone has to lower carbs to lose weight. If you lower your carbs, now your brain has a reduced fuel supply. So when you're eating, you feel good. But in between meals, your blood sugar gets low and your brain says, I need more food. And you get grumpy and hungry and irritable. And so it's hard to stick to a diet when you feel like that all the time, especially if you have to work during the day in a work setting where you have to think and interact with other human beings. Bodybuilders, most of us sit home. We can do whatever we want. It doesn't matter if we're in a grumpy mood. But for the average person, they're not going to be successful on a low carb diet. But if you get them onto a ketogenic diet where the carbs are so low that now their brain switches its metabolism from using carbs, glucose as a fuel source, to using fats, ketones as a fuel source, you have an unlimited supply. Because you always have stored body fat available, and then you're going to be eating fat in your diet. So you have a fuel source. So now the brain is like, great, we're never out of fuel. We don't have to worry about what blood sugar is. And matter of fact, blood sugar is always stable on a ketogenic diet because you're not really dipping into it very much. The only time you dip into blood sugar would be if you're doing, high intensity, workouts like weight training, or if you're silly enough to do high intensity cardio, you're going to dip into that glucose source. But other than that, you don't need it. Your brain has an unlimited fuel source. Now, if your brain has a stable blood supply of fuel on a ketogenic diet, and you feel good while dieting, imagine if you have a brain disorder that doesn't do well on fluctuations. I don't know about bipolar, but there are certain, issues that people have mentally, where they get depressed, and they don't feel good because of fluctuating glucose levels in the brain. So because the ketogenic diet keeps the levels of fuel consistent in the brain, it tends to alleviate a lot of problems. It's phenomenal for people who have seizure disorders. It almost eliminates seizures completely, okay? Because you're not fluctuating these energy levels in the brain. Depression, a lot of times, is very responsive to that. And now I'm hearing bipolar. It doesn't surprise me, because bipolar is, right? You're up and down and up and down and up and down. If you can stabilize the brain a little bit more, you're more likely to stabilize moods as well. And so like I said, it doesn't surprise me. It's not for everyone. Everyone doesn't need it. If you have a fast metabolism, you don't need to do it. But I put almost every woman that I diet on that. They do really, really well. They don't, because women like to snack, and it takes away that urge to snack. It's almost like a GLP-1. It's almost like taking Ozempic when you're on a ketogenic diet, because it stabilizes blood sugar, and fats delay the absorption of food through the intestinal tract. So you feel less hungry and you feel more satiated for a longer period of time. And that, once again, leads to success in dieting. If you're not hungry and you don't cheat, you're going to have better results.
We'll take one more question. It's a question that kind of leads into another question. First part of it is cortisol control, especially as it relates to inflammation and high blood pressure. Would increasing GH help? And then I guess the second part of it is best ways to increase GH naturally.
Yeah. Well, sleep decreases cortisol and it increases GH, right? When we sleep, we release growth hormone. So that's one way, okay? So if people who don't sleep enough, they tend to have higher cortisol levels, lower GH levels. That's an easy solution right there. Eating a high protein diet increases growth hormone release, obviously. We know that. Exercising, post exercise, you have a big surge of growth hormone release in the body. Obviously, if you want to do it naturally, those are the best two ways: sleep and training. If you take a growth hormone releasing peptide like a sermorelin, you can get from like TitanMedicalCenter.com, that will increase growth hormone, but that's now you're artificially stimulating it. Okay, so if you get your body into a good rhythm of eating regularly, so your body knows when to expect food, okay, you're going to see better results in your body. It's all about regularity. For people who are all over the map with their eating, and sometimes they eat, they miss a meal and then they overeat at the next meal, that whacks the body out. The body likes regularity, okay? When you stress the body out, you raise cortisol levels, okay? When blood sugar drops too low because you're missing meals during the day, what does your body do? It releases cortisol. Cortisol turns amino acids into glucose and raises blood sugar. So if you want to avoid high cortisol levels, don't miss meals and get enough sleep at night. The best two ways.
That's going to do for this episode of Ask Dave. Again, a reminder, if you haven't already done so, subscribe below, hit the notification bell. We have all new episodes of the After Hours podcast. Last week, we posted a clip from a previous episode of Ask Dave where Mike Menser reacted to seeing Dave Palumbo in the parking lot of Gold's Gym. Well, yesterday, it was a lot more expansive, untold stories of Mike Mentzer, hilarious stories of Mike Mentzer. Larry, who's, a regular on the panel, was actually a roommate of Mike Mentzer for a year. So some of the things that he was able to share, I'm sure have never been heard before. And you're definitely going to want to check it out and hear those stories. All new episode of After Hours. Then, of course, all new episode of Heavy Muscle Radio, Dave Palumbo and Chris Aceto. Again, next weekend, we'll be in Pittsburgh for the Pittsburgh Pro, and we are going to be packing your YouTube timeline, your Instagram feed with all sorts of content. So if you're not already subscribed, hit the notification bell. And if you're not following us on Instagram, official_RxMuscle. For Dave Palumbo, I'm Sadiq Faruqi. We'll see you next time.